I stood frozen in the doorway, my breath catching as I saw Lucas glance up at me with those piercing eyes. Something unspoken lingered in the air, electric and forbidden. He wasn't the boy I raised anymore, but a man, a realization that both terrified and thrilled me. "Mom," he said softly, the weight of his voice heavy with meaning. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. Life in our home was a symphony of routines, laughter, and subtle cracks no one dared to notice. My husband, an ambitious man, often left for extended business trips. He had been gone for 3 days, and the house felt different, too quiet, almost suffocating. My 2 sons, Henry and Lucas, were my anchors in his absence. Henry, at 33, was the rock of our family. Mature beyond his years, he carried responsibilities effortlessly, keeping everything running smoothly. He was the dependable son, the one I could lean on without hesitation. His steady presence brought a sense of balance to our lives. Lucas, at 21, was the opposite. He was vibrant, full of life, and unpredictable. Recently, he had transformed in ways I couldn't quite put into words. His athletic frame and newfound confidence radiated an energy that was hard to ignore. It was as though he had shed his boyish awkwardness overnight and stepped into the world as a man, a change that both unsettled and fascinated me. I found myself thinking about Lucas more often than I wanted to admit. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was someone I struggled to understand, someone who stirred emotions I wasn't prepared to confront. I dismissed these thoughts as stress or the loneliness of my husband's absence, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. The days passed in a blur of mundane tasks. Henry went about his usual routines, his comforting presence a welcome distraction. Lucas, on the other hand, lingered more than usual. His playful banter filled the spaces of our quiet home, and yet beneath the surface there was something else, a charge I couldn't ignore. His glances lingered, his laughter carried an edge I couldn't place, and his touch, even in innocent moments, sent shivers down my spine. The shift between us was subtle but undeniable. I found myself grappling with emotions I didn't want to face. He was my son, yet there was an invisible line that felt dangerously close to being crossed. Every moment spent in his presence left me torn. Between the roles I was supposed to play and the growing tension, I couldn't seem to escape. It started with small things, barely noticeable at first, moments that I could have dismissed as my imagination if they hadn't grown so persistent. Lucas had always been affectionate, but lately, there was something different about the way he interacted with me. His gaze lingered too long, his tone softened in ways that felt too intimate, too charged. One evening, as I was tidying the living room, I felt his eyes on me. Turning around, I caught him watching me from the couch, his expression unreadable but intense. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice trembled slightly. He nodded, but the weight of his stare didn't waver. It left me feeling exposed, as though he could see something I was desperate to keep hidden, even from myself. Lucas had been spending more time at home, avoiding the usual outings with his friends. His presence filled the house in ways that both comforted and unsettled me. The absence of my husband seemed to amplify every interaction between us. When Lucas offered to help with chores, I tried to brush off the tension I felt as he stood close, the warmth of his body too noticeable for comfort. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, Lucas walked in and leaned against the doorframe, watching me in silence. I forced a smile, trying to keep things light. "You're awfully quiet today," I teased. He shrugged, his eyes never leaving mine. "Just thinking," he said, his voice low and almost introspective. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation neutral. "About how much things have changed," he replied, his words heavy with meaning. I felt my pulse quicken but chose to ignore it, folding the shirt in my hands with more focus than necessary. Lucas's behavior wasn't the only thing stirring my unease. I began noticing how my own reactions to him had changed. When he walked into a room, I became hyper-aware of his presence. His laughter, once just a comforting background noise, now made my chest tighten. It wasn't right, I knew it wasn't, but I couldn't help the way my heart raced whenever our paths crossed. Then came the small but telling moments. The way his hand brushed mine as we passed plates at dinner. The way he stood a little too close when we worked in the kitchen together. The way his tone softened when he said, "Mom," as though it carried a weight far beyond the word itself. These were the cracks in the surface, hints of something unspoken but undeniable. I tried to rationalize everything. Lucas was young, still figuring himself out, and maybe this was just an innocent phase, a natural part of his transition into adulthood. But deep down I knew better. There was a line forming between us, one that blurred more with each passing day. The tension came to a head one evening when we were alone in the living room. Henry was out late, and the silence between Lucas and me felt suffocating. As we watched a movie, I became painfully aware of how close he sat to me on the couch. His arm brushed mine, and I froze, afraid to move, but even more afraid of what might happen if I stayed still. "Mom," he said softly, breaking the silence. His voice sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to him, forcing myself to meet his gaze. His eyes were searching, as though trying to gauge my thoughts. "Do you ever feel like things are different now?" His words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. My heart pounded as I struggled to find a response. "Lucas," I began, my voice trembling, "what are you trying to say?" He hesitated, his expression torn between vulnerability and something else, something forbidden. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just feel different." The days following Lucas's admission were an emotional storm I couldn't escape. His words, though vague, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. They clung to me, invading my thoughts as I went about my daily routine. I tried to shake them off, convincing myself that I had misunderstood his meaning. But the truth was far harder to dismiss. Something between us had shifted, and there was no going back. One afternoon, as the golden sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Lucas offered to help me prepare lunch. I hesitated for a moment, but nodded, grateful for the company even as my chest tightened with apprehension. As he reached for the cutting board, his arm brushed against mine. It was a simple, fleeting touch, but the electricity it sparked was anything but innocent. "Thanks," I murmured, trying to steady my voice. "Of course," he replied, his tone casual, though his eyes lingered on me for a moment too long. We worked side by side in silence, the tension between us palpable. I stole glances at him as he chopped vegetables, his movements confident and precise. His physique, so different now from the boy I had raised, was impossible to ignore. I scolded myself for the thought, but it didn't stop my eyes from lingering. At one point, I turned to reach for a spice jar on the top shelf. As I stretched, I felt Lucas step behind me. His hand brushed mine as he reached up to help, his breath warm against my ear. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Got it," he said softly, his voice carrying an undercurrent I couldn't decipher. "Thanks," I whispered, stepping away quickly, my face flushing. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I busied myself with stirring the pot on the stove, desperate to regain a sense of normalcy. But Lucas didn't retreat. Instead, he stayed close, his presence overwhelming. When I finally turned to face him, I found him watching me, his gaze intense and unyielding. "Mom," he said, his voice low. "There's something I've been meaning to say." My stomach twisted into knots. "Lucas, don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling. I knew where this was going, and I wasn't ready to confront it. "Please," he said, stepping closer. "Just let me talk." His eyes searched mine, filled with an emotion that both terrified and thrilled me. "I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his voice raw with honesty. "You're all I think about." His words hit me like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile barrier I had been desperately trying to maintain. "Lucas, this is wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're my son." "I know," he replied, his tone laced with frustration. "But I can't help how I feel. Can you?" I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down I knew he was right. I couldn't ignore the connection that had been building between us. It was wrong, undeniably so, but it was also real. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, tears stinging my eyes. "This isn't something we can talk about, Lucas. It's not something we can feel." "But we do feel it," he insisted, his voice breaking. "You feel it too. I can see it in your eyes." The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside me. I wanted to deny it, to push him away and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't lie to him, not when the truth was so glaringly obvious. "Lucas, this whatever this is, it has to stop," I said, my voice firm but wavering. He stepped back, his expression a mixture of hurt and determination. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why does it have to stop if it's how we feel?" "Because it's not right," I said, my voice cracking. "You're my son. This will ruin everything. Our family, our lives. It's not worth it." For a moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor. Then he looked up at me, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I can't just turn it off," he said softly. "And I don't think you can either." I felt my resolve crumbling, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "Lucas, please," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Don't do this to us." "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. I can't keep pretending everything's normal when it's not. His honesty was devastating, and I felt my heart breaking under the weight of it. We'll figure this out, I said, though the words felt hollow. But not like this. Not now. He nodded reluctantly, stepping away as though giving me space to breathe. But the tension between us didn't dissipate. It lingered, heavy and suffocating, as though daring either of us to cross the line we both knew we shouldn't. The next morning, the weight of the previous day's conversation hung over me like a dark cloud. I had barely slept, my mind replaying Lucas's words and the intensity of his gaze. I tried to convince myself that I could move past it, that we could pretend nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew there was no escaping the reality we now faced. Lucas was uncharacteristically quiet during breakfast, his eyes downcast as he pushed his food around on his plate. Henry, oblivious to the tension, chatted about his plans for the day, his cheerful voice a stark contrast to the suffocating silence between Lucas and me. I clung to Henry's normalcy like a lifeline, hoping it could anchor me, even as I felt Lucas's presence pulling me into uncharted waters. After breakfast, Lucas disappeared into his room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I busied myself with cleaning, trying to distract myself from the storm brewing inside me. But no matter how hard I scrubbed the counters or folded the laundry, I couldn't escape the lingering tension. It was as though the house itself was alive with unspoken words, the air thick with a charge that refused to dissipate. By the time afternoon arrived, I couldn't take the silence any longer. I knocked on Lucas's door, my hand trembling as I waited for him to respond. "Come in," he said, his voice muffled but steady. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Lucas was sitting on the edge of his bed, his shoulders slumped and his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The sight of him like that, vulnerable and conflicted, broke something inside me. "We need to talk," I said softly, closing the door behind me. He looked up at me, his blue eyes filled with a mix of hope and despair. "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about it all day." I took a deep breath, sitting down beside him on the bed. The distance between us was too small, the air charged with an intensity that made my pulse race. "Lucas, what you said yesterday, it can't happen again," I began, my voice trembling. "We can't." "Why not?" he interrupted, turning to face me. His expression was raw, his emotions laid bare. "Why can't we just be honest about how we feel?" "Because it's wrong," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. "You're my son, Lucas. This, whatever this is, it can't happen. It will destroy us." "But it already feels like it's destroying me," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I can't stop thinking about you, Mom. I don't know how to make it go away." His confession left me breathless, the weight of his words crashing over me like a tidal wave. "You have to try," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. "For both our sakes." He reached for my hand, his touch sending a jolt through me. "What if I can't?" he asked, his voice desperate. "What if I don't want to?" I pulled my hand away, standing up abruptly to put some distance between us. "Lucas, please," I pleaded, my voice breaking. "You have to understand how serious this is. If anyone found out—" "I don't care about anyone else," he said, standing to face me. "I care about us." The intensity of his gaze was too much, and I turned away, tears streaming down my face. "You're not thinking clearly," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't love, Lucas. It's confusion. It's loneliness." "Then why do you feel it too?" he demanded, his words cutting through me like a knife. "I see it in your eyes, Mom. You can't deny it." I spun around to face him, my emotions boiling over. "Because I'm human," I admitted, my voice shaking with anger and grief. "Because I'm lonely and confused and terrified. But that doesn't make it right." For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of my confession hanging heavily between us. Lucas's expression softened, his anger melting into something else, something deeper. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice filled with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you." His apology broke something inside me, and I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in my hands. "I don't know how we got here," I whispered, my voice muffled by my tears. "But we can't stay here, Lucas. We have to find a way back." Lucas sat down beside me, his presence both comforting and overwhelming. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do if I lost you." "You're not going to lose me," I promised, though my voice trembled with uncertainty. "But we have to set boundaries. We have to fix this." He nodded reluctantly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I'll try," he said, though his tone was filled with doubt. "But it's not going to be easy." "I know," I replied, my voice barely audible. "But we have to try." The rest of the day passed in a haze, the tension between us still palpable but subdued. We avoided each other as much as possible, each retreating to our own corners of the house. But no matter how far apart we stayed, the unspoken words lingered, a constant reminder of the line we had come so dangerously close to crossing. That evening, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the day in my mind. The raw honesty of Lucas's words, the intensity of his gaze, the way his touch had left me breathless. It was all too much. I knew I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild the walls that had crumbled between us. But as the night stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that those walls might never be the same again. The morning after our emotional confrontation, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. The weight of everything unsaid hung in the air, pressing down on me with an unbearable force. I went about my routine as if on autopilot, trying to convince myself that if I kept moving, the world wouldn't crumble beneath me. Henry was the first to appear, his cheerful greeting cutting through the silence like a beacon of normalcy. "Morning, Mom," he said with a grin, grabbing a plate of eggs and bacon from the counter. His obliviousness was both a relief and a stark reminder of how fragile our family's foundation had become. Lucas came in moments later, his demeanor subdued. He muttered a quiet, "good morning," before taking a seat at the table. He didn't meet my eyes, and I was grateful for it. I wasn't ready to face the storm brewing inside him, or myself. The tension between us didn't escape Henry's notice. "You two okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed as he looked between us. "Fine," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired, that's all." Henry nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. He finished his breakfast and left for work, leaving Lucas and me alone in the kitchen. The silence between us was deafening, filled with the weight of all the things we couldn't say. "Mom," Lucas began, his voice hesitant. "About yesterday." "Not now," I interrupted, my tone firmer than I intended. "We can't keep having this conversation, Lucas. It's not healthy for either of us." He flinched at my words, the hurt in his eyes cutting me to the core. "I know," he said softly. "But it doesn't just go away." "I need it to," I said, my voice trembling. "For your sake and mine." Lucas didn't respond. He stood and left the room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched him go, my heart breaking all over again. I had never felt so powerless, so utterly unable to fix the cracks that were forming between us. The rest of the day was a blur of mundane tasks. I scrubbed the counters, folded laundry, and tried to keep my mind occupied, but nothing could erase the tension that lingered in the house. Every time I passed Lucas in the hallway, the air felt charged, as if we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to break. That evening, Henry returned home, filling the house with his usual chatter. I clung to his presence like a lifeline, hoping it would drown out the silence that had taken hold. But even as we sat down to dinner, the weight of everything left unsaid loomed over us. Lucas barely touched his food, his gaze fixed on his plate. Henry noticed, of course, and tried to lighten the mood. "Hey, Lucas, you okay? You've been quiet lately." "I'm fine," Lucas replied, his tone flat. "Just tired." Henry shrugged, clearly unconvinced but unwilling to press the issue. I forced myself to engage in conversation, asking Henry about work and pretending everything was normal. But beneath the surface, I was unraveling, my emotions a tangled mess of guilt, fear, and longing. After dinner, I retreated to my room, hoping for a moment of solitude. But the knock on my door shattered any chance of peace. "Come in," I said, my voice weary. Lucas stepped inside, his expression conflicted. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though every fiber of my being screamed for me to send him away. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice trembling. "Maybe I should stay with Dad for a while. Just to clear my head." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The thought of him leaving was unbearable, but I knew it might be for the best. "If you think that's what you need, then I support you," I said, though my voice cracked with emotion. "It's not what I want," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the floor. "But I don't know how else to make this stop." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I reached out to touch his hand. "Lucas, I love you," I said softly. "More than anything. But you're right, we need space. We need time to figure this out." He nodded, his shoulders shaking as he fought back tears. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You're not losing me," I promised, though the words felt hollow. "You're my son, Lucas. Nothing will ever change that." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations for Lucas's departure. I helped him pack, each item folded with care, though my heart felt like it was breaking all over again. When the day finally came, I stood in the doorway as he loaded his bags into the car, my chest tight with a mix of relief and sorrow. As the car pulled away, I felt an ache so deep it left me breathless. I had done what I thought was best for both of us, but it didn't make the pain any less real. The house felt emptier than ever, the silence a constant reminder of the distance between us. I knew this was only the beginning. Healing would take time, more time than I could imagine. But as I stood in the empty doorway, I clung to the hope that we could rebuild what had been broken, even if it meant navigating the fallout one step at a time. The house felt quieter after Lucas left, the once familiar noise and movement replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. I kept myself busy, pouring my energy into work and chores, anything to distract from the ache in my chest. But no matter how much I tried to avoid it, my thoughts always found their way back to him. His words, his gaze, the raw emotions that had shattered the foundation of our relationship. Days turned into weeks, and though the tension had eased, it was replaced by a profound sense of loss. I missed Lucas terribly, not just his presence but the way he filled the house with his energy, his humor, his warmth. The space he left behind felt enormous, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right decision. Henry, ever the steady presence, noticed the change in me. "You've been quiet lately, Mom," he said one evening as we sat in the living room. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Just adjusting," I said finally, forcing a smile. "It's strange not having Lucas around." Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He'll be back," he said confidently. "He just needs some time. We all do." His words struck a chord with me, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. Lucas and I had made mistakes, but we were still family. I clung to the belief that, with time, we could find a way to heal. It wasn't easy, of course. The distance didn't erase the feelings or the memories. It merely gave us the space to process them. I spent many nights replaying our conversations, trying to understand where things had gone wrong and how we could move forward. It was painful, but it was necessary, a step toward rebuilding the trust and boundaries we had lost. Lucas called a few weeks later. His voice was tentative, but there was a lightness to it that I hadn't heard in a long time. "Hey, Mom," he said. "I just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." I swallowed the lump in my throat, grateful for the sound of his voice. "I'm okay," I said, though tears welled up in my eyes. "How are you?" "I'm better," he admitted. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. And I think I understand now." His words were a balm to my soul, a sign that maybe, just maybe, we were on the path to healing. "Me too," I said softly. "I'm so proud of you, Lucas. For taking the time to figure things out." "I'm proud of you too," he replied, his voice filled with emotion. "For being strong when I wasn't." The conversation was brief, but it left me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't a resolution, not entirely, but it was a step in the right direction. A reminder that love, even when it's complicated, is worth fighting for. As time went on, Lucas and I continued to rebuild our relationship. We set boundaries, learning to navigate the complexities of our emotions without losing sight of who we were to each other. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Slowly but surely, we found our way back to a place of trust and understanding. In the end, the experience taught me a powerful lesson about love and boundaries. Love, in all its forms, is complex and often messy. But true love, the kind that endures, is built on respect, trust, and the willingness to do what's right, even when it's hard. I realized that one moment of weakness didn't define us. What defined us was how we chose to move forward, to confront our mistakes and grow from them. Lucas and I had faced the unthinkable, and though it left us scarred, it also left us stronger. Sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew we were on it together. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. If you were in her position, how would you handle it? Would you let love blur the lines, or fight to restore what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that will leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned. Our next tale will reveal a secret even more shocking than this one.